5 years ago, on August 7th, 2019, the largest immigration raid in U.S. history targeted 7 chicken processing plants in 6 small towns in central Mississippi. That morning, 650 ICE agents arrested 681 Hispanic workers, restrained them in plastic handcuffs, and then took them to a military hangar in Flowood, Mississippi to be processed. After a terrifying day, 300 workers, mostly women with small children, were released with electronic monitoring devices. The other workers were taken to immigration detention centers and isolated locations in central Louisiana, about 3 to 4 hours away from home. August 7th, 2019 was the first day of school for many Mississippi children. Hundreds of them returned home that afternoon, not knowing why their parents were taken from them or what their futures would look like without them. With this small documentary film, we look at the impacts of the 2019 Mississippi ICE raids on children and their families. Do you remember that day?
Yeah, I do. I woke up, I was getting ready for school. My mom was getting ready for work. I went to school. The day went by fast. I think we were in last period. And then they called me up to the office to get checked out. My uncle comes to pick me up and I asked him why. And he said my dad's home. I got home. My dad and the neighbor that used to live here, they were talking. They were talking about how there was a raid at the place where my mom worked. She maybe had got taken, like a couple hours went by, and that's when I found out that she wasn't coming back home.
Many research studies have documented the devastating harm to children's well-being as a consequence of a parent's deportation. The effects of losing a parent include psychological trauma, material hardship, residential instability, greater reliance on public benefit programs, and family dissolution.
The Hispanic people are not doing nothing bad.
A 4-month-old baby who she hasn't been able to nurse in almost 2 weeks ever since agents arrested her as part of that massive sting operation in Mississippi.
Comida, pues, aquí están ayudando, pero para los biles, pues, no sé, la verdad.
When you ask what is the worst thing that can happen to a kid, either death of a parent or extreme removal from a parent is the number one most traumatic thing for a child. So that's more than sexual abuse, more than domestic violence.
Jordani's dad is Celso. He took care of their family when ICE agents deported his wife. They have 3 children. At the time, Jordani was 10, his brother was 7, and his sister was 4.
Se afectó bastante por mis hijos.
It affected my kids a lot. They were sad. They saw me crying, and they even started to get sick.
Maybe sadness.
Quizás por verlo de mí, no sé, se afectó
Maybe
mucho.
they saw him
Y ellos empezaron a enfermarse.
and they started getting sick.
Por mi hijo también.
And for my oldest kid, I think he remembers a lot.
Porque yo creo que él se acuerda mucho de todo lo que pasó. Entonces ellos.
I spoke to them about what happened as kids so that when they grow up to be adults, they don't question why I never talked to them about it or why I never explained what happened to them. Do you appreciate that honesty?
Yes, I do a lot. Because I'd rather him telling me what happened to her than me just finding out. And, yeah.
The raid not only affected plant workers and their families, but also the local economy. This is Betsabeth. She once owned a restaurant in Forest that served the community, especially many of the factory workers. I was preparing the lunches that I was going to take. I was so busy preparing and my business wasn't open yet. Someone started knocking on the door really hard and the phone was ringing a lot. Betsabeth says people ran from the plant, some looking for a place to hide. I had 7 employees at the time. Some of them were legal. I told them we shouldn't open the door because the agents may come in here. Today, it's the memory of abandoned children that still hurts her the most.
Entonces yo tuve que correr a la escuela Y le dije a los niños, no se preocupen, le digo.
So I had to run to the school and I told the kids, if you need food, you know I'm going to give you food. We'll figure out the housing.
Vamos a hacer, le digo, yo voy a hablar con las maestras. Entonces las iglesias se unieron. Yo tuve que cerrar mi negocio.
So the churches united. I had to close my business. I didn't want any of it because it was like a war. I closed my business. I united with the church to help the situation and also find funds for these kids.
A las personas de las iglesias para que nos ayudaran con los niños.
I kind of unite with the churches to help these situations.
Y también para
And
que nos
also
ayudaran con fondos para darles comida a los niños.
Now let's see all these hard people working. Let's see who the they're gonna work now.
Monica is an English language tutor. She works at the elementary school in Forest.
I got a text about there was helicopters around the plant and, you know, look on Facebook. And I started looking. And then as soon as I looked down, I looked towards the office and it was just like people were coming in. Like everybody was starting to get the news. And from then on, it was just like chaos. It's crazy. Giordani's one that I remember because they took his mom. And I mean, I remember him coming around the corner crying, hugging children. It was just real bad. So it was a long day.
She was one of very few people helping parents and students on that day 5 years ago.
They were just kind of just stood back, like literally against the wall. Like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know how to address it. And so I feel like it wasn't like, I mean, our principal was like, y'all just get the families together. Because once we told them, no, I'm letting these kids go home with aunts, with uncles. I'm not going to have them go home to nothing.
Right.
They stood back. But then I guess my biggest anger towards the school still is because to me, if it was like a mass shooting, they would have had trauma counseling or talk to the teachers or, you know, explain the situation. And it was never that. It was just like the next day, let's see who shows up and who doesn't. And kids were crying or kids didn't show up. And it was just not ever, like, I feel like we could have reached more kids and make sure, like, let's get a list, make sure all the kids were here. But I mean, we have over 300 kids.
So trauma in general plays out the same ways, regardless of what the trauma was. So children could develop initially, all the kids I would say probably had acute stress disorder, which is, it kind of looks like post-traumatic stress, but it's what happens in the first month after an event. So flashbacks, hypervigilant, you can imagine for children, structure and familiarity are really important. And so these are children that at the end of the day were called into the principal's office and told no one came to pick you up.
Did it affect you at school?
Yeah, I guess. I didn't want to do anything like at all. All I would do was sleep in class. I didn't do my work. I think I was failing every subject at the time.
Were there other students like you?
Yes, there was. Some of them. And they just like, they looked sad and all because the parents weren't there. And I felt how that was. And I used to talk to them and tell them how they were and everything to see if they were fine.
Many Mississippi churches and nonprofits from across the state, especially in the Jackson area and as far away as the Gulf Coast and Hattiesburg areas, worked to address the emergency needs of the impacted families. El Pueblo, a nonprofit with offices in Biloxi and Forest, began offering mental health counseling to families whose loved ones were taken in the raids.
It did help me a lot because my therapist, I could talk to her about anything or everything. And it felt good talking to somebody and letting it all out.
The symptoms from post-traumatic stress can go down over time with therapy. When you don't get therapy, we all of us humans have a tendency to put things kind of in a box. I think you and I talked earlier about this, that if you haven't really worked on it, then the first time you think about it, everything comes back up to you in the same way that you felt initially.
In addition to therapy, El Pueblo strived to support families and individuals with their losses. many saying it helped them buy groceries and afford their bills.
El Pueblo es el que ayudaba a
El
mucha
Pueblo
gente,
helped
le
a
daban
lot of people with
despensa, les
expenses
pagaban
like
la
rent.
renta, ahí donde fueron sosteniendo un poco a la gente.
Pues más que eso sí, la verdad se lo agradezco porque todo el pueblo cuando
Assistance with
comenzó
bills
eso,
and groceries has helped a
ellos
lot.
apoyaron
They're
mucho
still
lo
helping out
de
to
la
this day.
comida, de ayudar de otra manera, de los biles, de recibimos apoyo para ellos, pues yo los agradezco a ellos, ¿verdad? Y todavía siguen apoyando los que de verdad están, pues eso es lo bueno y yo sé que Dios les da más fuerza para seguir adelante porque ellos apoyan mucho.
Pues pienso que siempre pues se necesita la ayuda para.
There's always help needed in the community, so I think helping the people is something that doesn't ever have to stop.
Diferentes, pero pues siempre hay gente que necesita ayuda aquí en Forest y en los lugares que están cercanos a nosotros. La idea fue desde Trinity Mission.
The idea began when these ladies had asked immigration to put the ankle monitors on the opposite leg of their dominant leg because they were playing soccer. They couldn't work because they had the ankle monitors. Some of these ladies cooked and sold food to make their money. That is when they formed the group Mujeres Unidas.
Con el otro pateaban la pelota para poder seguir jugando. Entonces empezamos a hacer allá el grupo de mujeres. Ellas mismas cocinaban y ellas mismas vendían la comida porque ellas pues no podían trabajar porque tenían el grillete y de allá empezamos el grupo de mujeres.
I figured, people gonna need be able to pay the bond so they can come home. So that's when I began to come in, when I find out it was so much money they was raising for them. So that's when I began to do those applications and investigations of the information we're supposed to have in order to send it to the organization have raised the money for pay the bonds, and that was my role. I can never go. I'm not gonna be able to raise off my mind the moment when I see the kids. I just don't want to see that for nobody. For nobody. That affected me personally because I got kids. I can't be in that position. It can't happen to me. So I always put myself in that position so I can understand better. That affected me so much because, I care about people. We sure never have to go through this, but it's a lot of the sacrifice you have to do to provide for your kids. I can't remain silent as a pastor. I cannot remain silent as a community member. So now I have to, step in and continue to fight, advocate for our community, educate our community, and be prepared for something like this because it can happen again. I'm no longer, I have my business. I have to let my business go so I can be coming to work full-time for a nonprofit organization. It's called One Voice out of Jackson, Mississippi. It make me wanted to do, this kind of work because I want to be able to, help others before they get into their situation.
The families became more aware and we were more conscious to be like, okay, we're really hard now on you guys. When you guys come to registration, make sure anybody that can pick them up is on that list. Yeah. And then having a backup plan, just because you never know. I mean, just making sure you knew like where your kids' passports were. And so now they're more aware of having everything up to date. And I mean, you never know. You see some of the kids graduating and I mean, I'm proud of them, and I always tell them they need to come back and help the same community they left. Sometimes they're like, oh, y'all need to get out of, Mississippi. But sometimes it's better to get educated and then come back and change what. Yeah. And even now, like, my time I was like, you have to be real careful because a lot of these kids that went through the raid are now getting to a voting age. Yeah. And they're all born here. Yeah. So to me, it's like we need to do a lot of education with our community, the kids, and and talk to them and tell them they have rights and they can change things, they can make a difference.
That was really what allowed El Pueblo to open our second office, was the outpouring of financial help that came. I mean, we were working up there anyway. I was spending at least half of my time in Forest from that day until the next January, when Mike came on, when we got a director for the office there. And because there was so much to do. There was just an enormous amount to do. And I still marvel at how much El Pueblo, because we really are a very small organization, but how much we were able to accomplish. And I say we, but I mean all the people who were working in the Forest office and even the staff at the Biloxi office who were pitching in and manning the hotline and came up to Forest with me more than once. Once El Pueblo got established in Forest, one of the first things we were able to really do, besides offering legal help, was to facilitate mental health provision for those children. And El Pueblo was able to partner with some other organizations and get some grants and gifts from some local organizations to help provide that mental health counseling for those children and their families as well. And that, I think, was huge. Thanks to a lot of donations from a lot of people all over the country, we were able to help people get through those first 6 or 8 months. And then COVID hit. And so people were just thrown from one disaster to another.
Yeah.
So the sheer volume, just the being able to identify who needed help and then put them, together with the help that was available was a huge, huge task. And, it never could have been done without the great people that were working at Forest.
El Pueblo was there for people in their darkest hour. With the help of countless volunteers and the generosity of donors, we were able to provide much-needed mental health services for traumatized children, help build community and bonds of friendship for women who had lost their husbands to the raids, and provided much-needed legal services to community members who were not aware of their rights. We have learned a lot these past years, especially about the power of love and the resiliency of community. Another powerful lesson is that enforcement actions like the 2019 ICE raids do great harm to families and communities and are a terrible use of government resources. We hope and pray that the terror and grief our community suffered is never repeated in another immigrant community. The children are our future. Let us always treat them like the precious gifts they are. We thank you for watching our video.